Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I am your host, Josh Brom. I'm here again with Gabi Veers and my brother, Tim Brom, who has joined us for several episodes, basically to help us understand pro-choice people better and how to communicate with them better. And that's definitely what these next two episodes are going to be about. We've been cognizant recently of this idea that there are some times where I think pro-choice people misunderstand pro-life people. And what we're talking about today, like there's different ways that people misunderstand each other. I think sometimes people are really closed to what the other person has to say, and they immediately just kind of filter anything that person says through like the worst prism ever. And that's on them. But then there's also times when we can misunderstand the other person, but like it's legitimate. Like there's legitimate questions that can be asked to clarify, wait a minute. When you say that, that makes me think this. So I think that there's some areas, and this is what we're going to talk about in this episode and next week's episode, some things that I think pro-choice people could legitimately have valid questions about responding to things that pro-life people often say that could be confusing. And I think pro-life people should be willing and able to clearly communicate here's what I actually think about that. And so that's what we're doing today. None of these issues are things where we're blaming the pro-choice person. They're confused and it's their fault. I'm saying, no, these are legitimate things that could come up that I've never heard anybody talk about before. So I'm excited to have us do that today. And the first example that Tim thought of recently, or has had some experience with a few people that actually brought up this misunderstanding, came up after using a tactic that virtually every pro-life advocate does, whether they know the name that's usually used or not, and that's this idea, this dialogue tool that we call trot a toddler. So let's start with this, Gabi. Just catch everybody up. If you're not familiar with what that term means, help us understand what it means when pro-life people trot a toddler.
Yeah, sure thing. So trot a toddler, like Josh said, is a dialogue tool, and we use that to help bring a conversation that has drifted off the topic of what is the unborn onto a side issue. For example, the issue of poverty. So someone may say, well, I think abortion should be an option for women who are too poor to take care of their children. So to bring the conversation back to the issue of what is the unborn, we will literally trot out a toddler. Well, literally, figuratively, I should say. Figuratively, trot out a toddler. I keep one in my back pocket.
This is why I bring my kids with me on campus. Let me grab my Noah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what we'll say is like, okay, well, I agree with you. Poverty is a very difficult issue, but let's imagine that we have a toddler right here, or a woman who is facing a very difficult situation of poverty has a toddler. Should she be allowed to kill that toddler either for her own benefit or because she can't take care of that child and it's going to have a hard life in poverty? And the person will say, well, no, of course not. And so then we say, okay, well, yeah, I agree with you. We shouldn't be allowed to kill toddlers. So it seems to me the issue isn't so much poverty, even though that's a really difficult situation. The issue is, what is the unborn?
So what's happening here is, and sometimes I'll just say, look, let me help you understand where I'm coming from. I've got this view that the unborn are full human beings, just like toddlers. So for me, when you make a claim about poverty, it feels like, well, then there's this problem because no one would say we can kill toddlers because of poverty or privacy or a lot of these other issues that come up often. So that seems standard. How could anyone be confused by that? Tim, you've had some instances of people being misunderstanding what your views actually are after you trotted out a toddler. So help us understand what actually happened.
Yeah, and again, to be clear, it's a misunderstanding that I think is a legitimate misunderstanding. I don't think it's the fault of the person for just trying to paint us poorly. I think it's a good question. So last year, I had a couple of conversations with actual pro-choice people, and I went through the standard trot at the toddler kind of material because that just works really well. And a couple people said, well, so it sounds like if you think that if the fetus is human, like just as human as a toddler, and abortion is then just as wrong as any other murder, then does that mean that you also think that women who have abortions are just as evil as any other murderer? And I was thinking about that. It's like, I think that's a fair question. I don't think that. But that's a natural question to ask because we've made a statement of equality. We said this is equal to this. Right. And so if it's and obviously it's an analogy and no analogy is perfect. But still, if the killing the unborn is just as bad as killing a toddler, then it's natural to think, well, then women who kill their unborn are just as bad as women who kill their toddlers, right. Which is not what I believe. So that's kind of how things got started.
So how did you respond to that? How would you respond to that if that came up on campus? Because now I think, okay, now we've got a few thousand at least pro-life advocates listening to the show, and now they're like, oh, that might happen to me if it's not happened already. Let's talk about how best to respond to that and clarify our own viewpoints for the pro-choice people that are listening to the show.
Sure. So let's dialogue. So Gabi, come at me as this pro-choice person. We're on campus. We're in front of the Justice for All exhibit, and we'll just do it in dialogue form.
If you think that killing a fetus is just like killing a toddler, then you must think women who have abortions are just as evil as women who kill their children.
Well, I think that's a really great question. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a fair question to ask. So I want to try to help you understand what my view is because I actually don't believe that. I want you to understand why. So take for a minute the question of what the unborn is, and we're gonna put it to the side. Just assume with me, for the sake of this conversation, the unborn is totally human and valuable, just like you and me. And if we disagree about that, we can get back to it. But for now, let's just assume that. My question to you would then be, are some murderers more evil than others? What do you think?
Well, I'm not really sure.
Okay, so let's take a couple of examples of murderers. We'll make up a couple of examples and then try to see where our moral intuitions take us. So, do you have a sister?
I do. Yes.
Okay, so let's pretend for the first example that someone kills your sister, and then they get off on a technicality. They're arrested. But for some reason, they're not convicted, even though it's clear that they were the murderer. And then you decide, this is not okay. They're not going to get away with this. And so then you go and you kill them. I think in that situation, you are now a murderer. I think it's a particular kind of murder. I think you've done something wrong, but it seems less wrong to me than other cases. So let's bring up a second example. Just a standard person who decides, a sick person who kidnaps a woman and tortures her and kills her. Now we've got two murderers that we're thinking of now. We've got you, who's done this kind of revenge murder, and we've got this guy who's just kidnapped someone and tortured her and killed her. Do you think one of these murderers has done something worse than the other?
I mean, they're both really bad, but it seems like the second case is worse.
Right, I would completely agree with you about that. And what's critical about these two cases is it seems to me like they're equally human. Would you agree with that? That both the murder victims are equally human.
Yeah.
So what that shows me is that even if we've got two people that are being killed and they're equally human, the murderers themselves might not be equally evil because there's other factors that come into play. What the intent is, what they know about the situation, that kind of thing. And so now to jump back to abortion, I think it's the same kind of thing there. I think killing an unborn human being is just as wrong as it is to kill a born human being, a toddler. But that doesn't mean that in terms of evaluating people's hearts, that it's just a pure one-to-one.
There's a lot of things that you did there that I think you did purposefully that I want us to kind of break down step by step into helpful. Here are some things that would be worth doing if this comes up. And I felt like the first thing you did, besides explaining, yes, I think that's a valid assumption that you might make or misunderstanding you might make of my view when you hear me say that, you basically clarified that that's not the point of this analogy.
Yeah, analogies are very powerful tools, and arguments by analogy can be very, very persuasive. But they can also be very confusing because analogies aren't perfect. There are no perfect analogies. That's why they're called analogies. Right. And so very commonly, I like to make arguments by analogy because I think they can be very effective. But often as people will say, oh yeah, well, but that's not a perfect analogy because of this. It's like, no, well, I agree with you. But that's not what the analogy is talking about. Right. What the analogy is talking about is something very specific, and that's comparing the value of the unborn to the value of a newborn or someone else who's already born. It's not talking about whether or not people are evil. And so we have to be very careful as we're explaining this to be clear on what part of the analogy we're talking about, because obviously it's not a perfect one.
You also you asked for clarification. You acted like this is not, you showed that this is not simple, that you actually believe that some methods of killing or some acts of murder are more evil than others. Expand on that a little bit, because I think there's some people that kind of just probably go around just feeling like, yeah, it just seems like all murder's equal. So why did you do that?
Something that I tend to harp about is that clarity is one of the most important things to having a productive conversation. And so if you don't have, if the details are different, then it's harder to compare things, because now we've got multiple variables going on and we're not sure how to put the equation together. If we just got one variable, so all the other details are the same, which is what Trot the Toddler, the tool, does. It says, okay, so here's an unborn child that you want to kill for poverty. Well, what if it's a toddler that we want to kill for the same reason? We want to be very clear about what the reason is. We want to be very clear about what we're talking about. Right. So again, so they can follow the analogy.
We're not saying compare this to some parent that kills their child for any reason. Maybe they're insane. Who knows? Right. We're saying no. Here's these parallel cases. If it's privacy, what if, well, we wouldn't say the parents can kill children in the privacy of their own home. We've already kind of said, okay, it's not these other things. It's pretty clear what we're talking about, and those details are important.
Yeah, and if they start with Trot the Toddler, it's a little bit different, because if someone were to talk to Gabi after she had just given her explanation of Trot the Toddler, then we've already agreed on some details. We're talking about poverty or privacy or whatever we're talking about. But as when Gabi came up and she challenged me in our little dialogue, we didn't start with any details. She just said, "Oh yeah, so you think this? So what about that?" And in that case, I need to give some context to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about, because we haven't already done that groundwork by trotting out the toddler.
So what we're trying to do here is to assess the morality of the actions, not the person's character.
Yes, we want to judge actions, not judge their character. Because judging people's character is a whole lot harder, at least if you happen to not be Jesus, and we aren't. Right. And part of the problem there is there's a lot of things that we don't know. We don't know what's going on in people's hearts, and that's one of the really critical things in the approach that I took. When you're evaluating someone's actions and trying to determine how evil something was, it's highly relevant what that person's mental state was at the time. What did they believe? What did they know? What were they considering? Because it seems obvious. So just to give another example, and this is not a perfect analogy what we're talking about. It's just an analogy for this point. Just talk about what we believe is relevant. So let's suppose for a minute that Josh blows up a building, and he doesn't know that there's someone inside it. Some homeless guy's in the building. He blew it up. Oops, that's unfortunate. Now let's say
super unfortunate.
Super unfortunate. Right. This is a big deal.
Not just oops.
Yes, not just oops. But let's say an alternative version of this story. He knew the homeless guy went in there, and Josh, just being the person that he is, hates homeless people. This is just this is just who Josh is.
Love where this went.
Just a brotherly love. Josh just hates homeless people, and so it's like, yes, good, I can kill one. And then he pushes the button and blows up the building.
Right, and those are two different actions.
Yes, how you would judge Josh's behavior is very different, even though he's killing the same person, and it's just as bad in the sense that a valuable human being has died in both cases. But how we evaluate his behavior, it's dependent on what he believed, what he knew about the situation. So the same is true with abortion.
Right. So I completely agree with that. And so when I was thinking, okay, what do I think? Because I'm not in this. I think maybe some pro-choice people think we're in this constant state of judging people. Like that's just like how so it's like that's not me. I'm not like going around like about all women that have abortions and trying to weigh how evil they were. That's just not like where I'm at. But as I was thinking, okay, what would I think about that if I was asked directly? It's like, well, I think I can think of some things that I believe are relevant differences between most or many aborting women and someone that just indiscriminately killed their toddler. Abortion is just this really awful but also weird and kind of unique situation. Like, it is legal in our country to kill people for the first 9 months of their life with certain exceptions. And so it's been legal for 40 years now. Like, I think when something's been legal for 40 years and when society generally supports it, sadly, and is taught in the schools, like automatically there's something different going on with abortion. I think when people are coerced into abortions, that's something different than just the standard when you've trotted out the poverty, thing. I think a lot of women aren't super clear about what the unborn is. I'm not saying all women. I know some people want to say like no woman has any idea. I think that's I'm not going to say that. But I think there's some women that don't think it's a full human being. Whereas like with infanticide, like outside of philosophy classes, no one's debating about whether we can kill infants. That's only the philosophers, So sorry.
No, it's a valid criticism.
Yeah,
my discipline.
So these are relevant, I think, differences that are in my mind that I would be willing to explain. Yeah, this is why, if I had to think about it, which is not really what I do, but if I had to think about it, I would say these seem relevant to me. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the same misunderstanding can happen when we use other examples. If we refer to abortion as a Holocaust or we compare abortion to slavery, then people will be like, oh, so you think that women who have abortions are like slave owners in the 1800s, or you think that women who have abortions are like genocidal maniacs or Nazis? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've gotten the same kind of question, and it comes up in exactly that kind of context. And this is important because pro-lifers talk about abortion as a Holocaust all the time.
Yeah,
right.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, although I think we need to be careful how we do that. And this is one of the ways. If you're going to say that abortion is a Holocaust, I think it's valuable, if you can, to clarify. You're not saying that it's a perfect analogy. Analogies are never perfect, otherwise they wouldn't be analogies. And the same is true of this. I think that an unborn human being is just as valuable as a Jew or a Gypsy or whoever else was killed in the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that the mental states of the Nazis who killed them are identical to the mental states of the women who killed their unborn. And again, to be clear, I'm not letting women who have abortions off the hook. I'm not saying, oh, well, they don't know, and so it's no big deal. No, it's a really big deal. But that doesn't mean it's equal to a situation when someone is very clear on who they're killing, and that they're killing someone.
And when you go to actually, if you were going to have to judge their action, it's more complicated than just they had an abortion.
Yes.
There's these relevant factors that go in, and a lot of that has to do with what did they know, what did they think, what was their mental state when they chose to do this.
Yes. And this works really well on campus, too. If you explain this kind of thing, or in conversation, in my case, I'm oftentimes on campus when I'm having these conversations. But if you're having one of these conversations, take some time. And this is part of the common ground process. This is an amazing step of common ground. Saying, no, I agree with you. I don't think that all killing is just equal, and that all women who have abortions are monsters. Maybe some of them are. I'm not sure. But at least some of them aren't. I have friends who have had abortions, and I think that the circumstances they were in, while I'm not justifying what they did, they're a lot more understandable than the Nazis. Right. We can agree on that. Yeah. Common ground.
Right. And suddenly you're not as crazy as they thought you were, or mean as they thought you were, or whatever, when they first came up to you. I mean, there's this, and this can happen in other ways when we do dialogue, but especially when we're finding common ground, like you've just helped to depolarize this thing. You are suddenly not complete polar opposites. They're not super, like I'm the super rational one and you're an insane pro-life person. I'm going to do it. I don't even know if that would make a difference. But they're completely rational. You're an insane pro-life person that just wants women to not have the right to vote or do anything else. Like you just want things to go back to the Stone Ages. Suddenly it's like, wow, you seem more reasonable than I expected. In fact, I think that contrast can even be helpful. They expected you to be this, and you're not that. And it's like, whoa, that's it's very surprising, and that could work, I think, to your favor.
You're actually, you think about women who have abortions and, how they feel?
Care about them?
That's actually crossed your mind?
Right. Do not just complete, I hate babies, homicidal maniac, or, it's like, yeah, that's not the way. I don't know any pro-life people that are like that. That's not the way that we think just because we trot a toddler.
Yeah, and also to be clear, I'm not saying this is the kind of thing we should say to make people like us more.
Right.
No, if you don't actually believe this, there's something, I think, really confused in your head.
You
Truly.
should think this way.
You should think this way. If you think that all women who have abortions are just as bad as Nazis because the Nazis killed Jews and Jews are equal to unborn babies, then I think you're thinking poorly.
So you should go and listen to this episode again, and this is a great thing with podcasting. You listen and understand, like, we have a confident view here that there are certain things that are relevant when discussing something like that, and I would want you to change your mind on that. Before we close, let's do another quick one that we talked about, where a lot of pro-choice people, they see, like, the JFA exhibit. So Tim works for Justice for All. I didn't mention that at the top of the show because I'm a bad host. But Tim works for Justice for All, and who we've partnered with. And so JFA has this exhibit, this brochure, and this exhibit they put on campuses. And there's this fetal development, sign. It's got these different stages of human development. And the second picture the third picture is an implanted embryo, or an embryo at implantation. And we're talking about this idea that, like, pro-life people, we believe that is a full, intrinsically valuable, special human being or person. Whereas a lot of pro-choice people see that and, like, that's not person, right? That's like, like, maybe the later term one, but not that, right?
And they're confused because we're making this big deal about killing them.
Right.
Why are you making such a big deal about this?
About that.
It looks like a moldy orange.
Right.
Like, what's the deal?
Right. So how would you respond to that on campus?
I'll tell you what I have responded on campus. I've said, I agree with you. We got common ground.
It doesn't look like much, does it?
It doesn't look like a human being the way that I think about human beings. I agree with you. And if I think about someone taking that implantation embryo and squishing it, that doesn't affect my moral intuitions in the way that it would affect my moral intuitions if you were to take a toddler, a child, and kill them. Like, I would have this huge, visceral, indignant reaction to that in a way that I don't naturally think that way about the implantation embryo. And if pro-lifers are starting to worry, no, I really think that that embryo is valuable.
Right.
I'm just saying it doesn't cause that kind of an emotional reaction in me. But I don't think emotions are everything. I think I could be a horribly racist person and just not care about black people or Asians or whoever, but still think that it's wrong to kill them if I believe in my moral reasoning that they're equal to me and just as valuable as me. So what I would say to the person on campus is, I agree with you that it doesn't seem human and it doesn't create that kind of an emotional connection, but I think it makes the most sense to believe that what makes us valuable, the thing that makes us special, is our human nature. And that embryo, even though it doesn't look very human, has that. And so I believe that it's morally wrong to kill it, even though it doesn't bring out this indignation in me.
Almost everyone can agree, once you start bringing up other examples, that we shouldn't be judging people's humanity based on the way they look and how much like us they look. I mean, the elephant man is kind of the obvious one that comes to my mind. Is like, yeah, people actually thought this guy was an animal because he looked like the way he did, but he wasn't. Or I mean, the story, man, I forget the name of the zoo back in the early 1900s that
the pygmies.
Yeah,
yes.
the pygmy is just like that.
Put them on exhibit and called it the missing link.
Missing link thing. Yeah,
they did that with the Filipinos during the exposition in Chicago. Yeah,
so it's like, yeah, you're ignoring the thing that we have in common. That human nature that human is. So it seems obvious that we shouldn't be making. So have you found that to be like, if people bring this up and this is kind of the obvious thing to do, is kind of make analogies to other things, right? We argue from analogy, right? So have you found that to be helpful, or do people have this like, yeah, I'm completely with you on pygmies and the elephant man, I'm just still not with you on the implantation embryo? Like, what has happened for you on campus?
I found it to be very helpful, and then usually we'll argue about whether or not the embryo has a human nature, which is the natural place the conversation goes. But again, it's a common ground step. The reason this topic is so important to me is because one of the reasons is because these are ways in which we can really engage with people and understand what's going through their minds. Like, they're confused. They think we're weird. So if we can clarify, I agree with you. I think we agree on a lot of the same things. The reason that I have this view is because I believe this, and that's it. No, I think you're a normal person, and I'm a normal person. I don't think that an embryo looks just like a toddler.
Right.
Why would anyone think that? Right. I think it's as valuable, but of course I don't think it looks just like a toddler.
Right. It's a philosophical view I have. It's not based on just my emotion of looking at these and saying, "Oh man, I want to give it a hug." It's not the same.
And then they might think, "Oh, okay, so maybe you're not just crazy.
Right.
Maybe you're not just one of those weird right-to-lifers that just kind of does this right-to-life thing and doesn't even think." Like, no, you believe in reasonable things. And now let's talk about the critical thing we don't agree about.
Okay. Stay tuned, because next week we're talking about a few other areas where we think pro-choice people could have a valid misunderstanding based on the things that pro-life people say, including a very controversial one. We've never touched it on the show, but we're going to talk about how do you respond to the person that's confused about why pro-life people don't want to just indiscriminately hand out condoms, and how that would be confusing to pro-choice people that thinks that would reduce abortions. We're going to talk about that next week. Tim Brom works for Justice for All. If you really like Tim and want to support him, then you can go to Justice for All's website at jfaweb.org, click on the Meet the Mentors page, and there'll be links under Tim's right at the top, because his last name starts with B. So you can go, yay! There's links there where you can get more involved in Tim's work. That's our show. Have a great week.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.
Thank you for listening to Life Report. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California, and if you would like to help support the organization and their educational mission, we invite you to attend this year's annual Golf for Life tournament. Held on Thursday, May 16th at the beautiful Sunnyside Country Club in Fresno, this event is a wonderful way to both promote the sanctity of human life and have a great time with your pro-life friends. Registration and lunch will begin at 11:30, and dinner is at 5:30. You can find out more by visiting our website at righttolifeca.org, or by calling our Fresno office at 559-229-2229. Some of our many sponsors this year include Ashwood Construction, Mike and Dolores Elkins, San Joaquin Figs, Spencer Enterprises, Tim and Deborah Bone, Campos Brothers Farms, Delana Farms, Electric Motor Shop, Producers Dairy, Rick and Debbie Goddard, and Spirit 88.9. We're extremely grateful for this wonderful event and for the wonderful people who support it, and we hope you will join us. Once again, on Thursday, May 16th at Sunnyside Country Club. Find out more by visiting righttolifeca.org.